Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. In a bid to address the persistent issue of prison overcrowding, Home Minister Saifuddin Nasution Ismail says the government has agreed in principle to implement the licensed release of prisoners. Now, this initiative means that aims at granting home detention to a specific category of prisoners. Those include those serving prison sentences of 4 years and below, individuals with chronic illnesses and the elderly, people with disabilities, as well as expectant mothers. Now, this move has been lauded as a step towards prison reform. However, it has sparked some concerns regarding potential favoritism, favoritism towards privileged and or influential individuals who have been convicted of crimes. So the discussions of home detention has intensified recently, and the questions have been raised about the necessary safeguards and conditions that are required for its successful implementation. So joining us today to discuss this further is Gerald Joseph. He is chair of the advocacy group CSO Platform for Reform. He was also a Suhakam commissioner from 2016 to 2022. Gerald, thank you so much for being on the show with me to share some of your insights. I'm just wondering if we could start with getting your take or your views on this initiative, the licensed release of prisoners. Is it a step in the right direction?
Good evening. Thanks for the invitation. This initiative of License Release Prisons Initiative, I think PBSL, the Malay acronym, has been around for some years. I was a member of the committee when I was in Suhakam, invited to join. The chair is the Director General. So I think this is not a new initiative of trying to verify and check who qualifies and who doesn't. And I think this is the way society should go. The difference is that even if you are released, so you qualify for this, you are still a prisoner, convicted. Nothing changes in terms of your state. People who feel that this will wipe out the branding of them having consequences, it's not. So that is a way to, of course, the previous motivation is, number one, we have overcrowding, which we've had in many periods of our prison history. Number two, the question is, can people be given a chance to hasten their reform and reintegration process into society? And usually, a prison environment is a good punishing environment. And I think that's why people pay for their crime, because they've done something wrong against the law. But I think towards the end, when you have served the bulk of your sentence and then you're not deemed to be a threat to society, and there's a criteria for this, which I'll go into later, then I think releasing them and they have the last 1 year left or a few more months left actually is a good way to encourage and motivate them in terms of the process of getting them back into society. And I think this committee does not release anyone like, okay, please go ahead, bye-bye, take care. They don't do that. There's quite a good check list that the prison officers do. The prior list is while you're inside, but also when we were there, they were very strict in finding they'll have to answer two questions: where they're going to live once they have been released, and do they have an economic opportunity, meaning a job waiting for them. These two criteria are very strong criteria, and the prison department really tries to find a home. And some families don't take their children back home for a variety of reasons, including trouble, stigma, difficulty, but also sometimes not able because it could be a very old grandfather or grandmother in one house and cannot able to. But also many times some are repeating offenders who say, I cannot handle it. But so finding where do they stay, halfway home. And then the second question is there a job waiting for them? Because there's no point releasing somebody to get a fresh breath of air in open society, only to be desperate enough to be lured back into criminal activity. So I think there is a very strict criteria on this, and I think for us as society, second chance for someone to come out of that loop of criminality and get back to society is something we should encourage. I think this does that in the long run.
Right. Gerald, so you point to the fact that this is a good initiative, but it also rests on the way it's executed, right? The criteria, the selection of who gets to be released into home arrest or home detention. Those concerns that it might be abused, that there could be favoritism in the picking of the privileged and the influential. Those who are privileged and influential in serving prison sentences, I mean, to put it bluntly, concerns that Najib Razak might be allowed to serve the remainder of his jail term under house arrest. What safeguards would you like to see in place to prevent abuse or manipulation of this initiative, to ensure that it is effective in its implementation?
I think the criteria should be fair across the board. So I think the prison department can release how they manage this. When I was in the committee, and I think the committee continues now very efficiently. I think, and you mentioned it, Melissa, in your beginning statement, that the minister has said those have 1 more year of their sentence to serve. Their actual conviction has only allowed them 4 years or below of sentencing. So it's a 1 to 3 years kind of crime, which is supposed to be a smaller crime. So, that answers the biggest question everybody has been reacting to, our former Prime Minister Najib, will he qualify for this? But just going by this criteria, he does not. He's got a 12-year conviction, or even with the 50% discount by the pardons board, it's still 6 years. So it doesn't qualify for this even on the first criteria. And I think the other criteria, critical illness, pregnant women, elderly, also needs to follow that original criteria, because it's not for anyone and everybody, because everybody who are older can get sick, and so that's not the logic of you're going in sick and then you get released because you're not well. So I think this if this criteria is followed fairly across the board, and when I was in the committee, actually the thousands of names that we review every month is actually people who are former drug addicts, minor thefts. There was 1 or 2 cases of domestic violence abuse, and that one there's a lot of questions of, is the Jabatan Kebajikan involved in ensuring, protection, and where is he going back to his wife or not? So I think those are the kind of convictions, where your jail term is, as I say, 1 to 3 years, and that's the only one that qualifies. And they start getting reviewed by the committee when they come down to about 12 more months before release. That's when the committee activates. So you don't get the review at the first part of your conviction. So I think if it's a fair across the board criteria, I don't think there will be any gray area. So I think if we worry about privileged individuals who are jailed, like former prime ministers, then that should not be the case. It just should come up. The Director General will say this is the criteria. And more recently, he was defending the prison system against giving special treatment to the former Prime Minister. He said no, it's across the board. But all this needs to be proved through methods, mechanisms of the prison order, and check and balance. So oversight. So I think. Well, I'm not in Suhakam, but the Suhakam can definitely go and check in on Prime Minister Najib to see whether he's getting special privileges or not.
Well, you're absolutely right. That has been, I guess, the center of attention, particularly around discourse over this license release of prisoners. I want to ask you, Gerald, how important is getting public buy-in for this? Are there concerns that there could be backlash over this initiative? You pointed to the fact that this is in line with the humane treatment of those who have been convicted and served their sentence. What would you like the public to understand about home detention or the license release of prisoners?
I think the first question that begs to be answered is that society was never interested in prisoners' issues of welfare. We are most happy for any prisoner to be caught, thrown in jail, and throw the key and lock, so to speak, very broadly. I think it's time we meaning society takes co-responsibility of why so many end up in prison. If we find ourselves that burden of asking that critical question, then we would also start wondering who are the serious criminal. Is there a chance for the question of second chance back into society? So if we get involved in prisoners rehabilitation, reintegration, there would be a different appetite for interest. All this while nobody bothers about the prison. However, the prison department work hard, suffer in that environment. No one cares. But now, rightfully so, people are worried that it may be abused. So I think the first is to give more information. And PBSL, this early release initiative, is a formal committee chaired by the Director General, has been around for many years. We just probably never knew about it. And they've been doing work to not release people because they like to release, but they find it in a systematic way to ensure people who are at the tail end of sentencing and have no flight risk, no risk to society. So the criteria for orientation and assessment is done very thoroughly. You have to prove that you're well behaved in prison. And I learned this while I was there. They have I forget the term, but it's like A, B, C, D, E. You have to go through from your week 1 to the end. And they check on that. If you have even a smallest infraction of behavior, you won't qualify. You'll just be kicked out of the list. So the internal integration, discipline, food practice, and all that is taken into account before somebody is brought to this committee. But I think for lack of information, most of us fear that the prison department director general will get a call to say, oh, do something, and I think he has to defend the integrity of his office, his role and responsibility, as he's mandated by the Prison Act to play this role. And I think with the changing tide and mood in Malaysian society, I think, which is a very positive thing, from a common person like you and me, Melissa, but I think you are not so common, but to others like former Prime Minister, we are all subject to the same scrutiny, the same courage and strength of the court to decide if we are guilty of any crime, and we will end up in prison if we have committed a crime. I think that's the trajectory that anyone will go through. And the other end, the releasing part, should also follow the same trajectory of anybody, as I mentioned, the drug abuser, the minor theft, abuser. You will have to go to that end of the committee to follow the same criteria. But I think lack of information, and I really call on KDN and maybe the Prisons Director General to furnish this available readily. There's nothing secret about how the committee works. I mean, we don't have to reveal who comes to the committee, but the criteria, so that we will be confident that there will be little space or no space for abuse.
Right. Gerald, thank you so much for speaking with me. Always insightful to tap your knowledge. Appreciate your time. That was Gerald Joseph, Chair of CSO Platform for Reform. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We will be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the Licensed Release of Prisoners Initiative, or home detention, to which the government has agreed in principle to implement. What safeguards and oversight is necessary for its successful implementation? Well, let's ask our next guest, lawyer and activist Chong Kayan. She's a partner at YH Bu and Partners. Kayan, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. As a lawyer with some experience in human rights advocacy, may I ask you what your initial thoughts are on this initiative, the Licensed Release of Prisoners initiative, particularly with regards to the potential impact it might have on the rights of prisoners?
Thank you, Melissa, for having me. It's my honor. It's my honor. Okay. Regarding the proposed license release of prisoner initiative, the government actually has provided very limited details on how the PBSL will work, but it is not something new. The current PBSL scheme include target specific group like those with chronic illness, chronic disease, the elderly, disabled individuals, and the expected mother. But recently, I understand that the government has agreed in principle to implement the PBSL. To be more specific, the prisoners serving due time of 4 years and below, they will undergo home detention as a very effort to reduce overcrowding situation in prison. I myself, I welcome this initiative. I welcome it so much, but because it will not only address the overcrowding situation in the prison itself, but it also facilitates the reintegration of the inmates into the society. Specifically, after the recent abolishment of the death penalty and the introduction of the Resentencing Act, the former death row inmates whose sentence were commuted to 30 to 40 years, and they might have a few months or even few years left in the prison. So it is crucial for those who have served their extensive periods and are nearing out of the end of their sentence. It is a very good opportunity to allow them to reconnect with family and adjust themselves or familiarize themselves with the society life.
Okay, so you say this is a step in the right direction, but what needs to be in place to make sure that this initiative is effective in practice?
So in my opinion, for the practice to be effective, I think we do not have much details regarding the plan, but I feel like the government must engage with the stakeholders, especially the NGO, such as Kekasih, Hayat. They work on the abolishment of death penalty for many years, the family members of the inmates, and of course the former inmates in help the government to design an effective framework, and maybe even they can engage with Sohakam to monitor the human rights compliance. But essentially, I urge the government, and I would very much emphasize on this point, I hope the government can set out a clear standards and transparent policy and guideline to determine the eligibility of the inmates. I feel like this is very crucial to avoid PBSL as a special privilege exclusive for VVIP or politicians to get benefit or manipulate from the scheme. So I think it be fair and accessible for all.
Right. I get what you're alluding to, and I'm just going to ask the question. We know there are concerns over Najib Razak's judicial review leave application to allow for him to serve the remainder of his jail term under house arrest. There have been many comments made about that. So I'm asking what you would like to see to prevent those very abuses that you mentioned earlier for manipulation of this initiative for the privileged. What safeguards and oversight would you like to see in place, Kayan?
All right, if you are talking about a fair scheme available to all, available to those who is eligible, it is very hard for us to exclude, for example, Najib specifically from the scheme. It's very hard for us to exclude him. But rather, I hope that it would be a fair and standard scheme available to those who are eligible, to make sure that not only VVIP benefited from the scheme. Rather than we exclude him, I hope that this scheme will be a more inclusive and accessible one.
Okay, all right. Are there potential risks? Are you concerned that if the implementation of home detention for those certain categories are not properly executed, implemented, are there potential risks associated with the PBSL program?
I understand where the public comes from. I understand they might have concern about potential risks of the initiative, but it is not for me to give a conclusive conclusion or a summary, and it is not possible to completely predict or negate all risks. But I would just like to point out that actually the federal court takes into account of all the factors, including the characters and the behaviors of the inmate, while the federal court deciding on the sentencing of those on death row or those serving life imprisonment. So the careful consideration, the scrutinization, the process ensure that only those deemed suitable for release are considered. I have a very assuring statistic. To be more specific, the parliamentary answer from the Home Minister to YB Rao Chow Li Hui in maybe 11th of October last year. There's a data from Jabatan Penjara Malaysia which saying that known death row inmates who have been granted pardon and released from the prison are recorded as being rearrested in prison. But I understand that we could not negate all the risks, but this is a very assuring statistic and on our future direction.
Okay, so you said that you understand the concerns of the risk, but I want to focus on that, the public's reaction to this. If it is going to be implemented and implemented well, you need public buy-in. What steps do you think the government should take to ensure that there is public acceptance, there's public understanding over this initiative?
The skepticism, okay. So I understand the public's reaction. There might be some skepticism from the public, potentially concerning those high-profile beneficiaries. So I feel like it is important for the lawmakers, for example, the MPs, to use this as an opportunity to address some other broader issues, such as prison overcrowding, human rights, and whether the scheme is accessible and transparent, rather than we just focus on budget itself.
Kayan, do you know if there are other countries that we can look to? I mean, I'm not sure how many countries practice home detention or early release on license, but are there best practices or experiences or lessons that we can take from other countries' experiences that have similar prisoner release programs that Malaysia is looking at that we could learn from and maybe improve our version of home detention?
I am not an expert in foreign jurisdiction, but I see there are some countries, for example, Taiwan, they have this legal arrangement in which a person who has been found guilty, they are not sentenced to jail immediately, but maybe they may be sentenced in a future time. For example, there's a probation period. If you commit a crime in a probation period, you may be arrested again. But if you're a good boy, you're a good girl, you are behaving in this probation period, then you are a free person. So perhaps we can take this as a lesson. So to strike a balance between the interests of all parties, the government can maybe set a probation period. If the inmate reach any of the reasonable terms, of course, the reasonable terms and conditions imposed by the authority, they might be arrested. So we could look into those models, for example, Taiwan's deferred sentencing models, to provide a probation period during which the rearrest can occur, to strike a balance between all parties and maybe to give assurance to the public regarding the initiative.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, we should be thinking about other models or thinking about other ways we can reform our prison system. Can I ask you, based on the work that you've been doing, your advocacy work, your activism work, what do you think are or should be the key priorities for Malaysia when it comes to prison reform? What would you like to see prioritized?
Okay, from my personal experience, sometimes because we do not have much engagement with the inmates of those in the prison or those who work in the industry, who work in the police itself, so we might be very skeptical and we might think that, oh, they are all like bad, big devil, and we often neglect what are the situations they face in the prison itself. For example, the overcrowding issue, the food, the healthcare, and etc. etc. For example, the women inmate, whether they have enough menstrual product for them for the menstruation, and etc. etc. So I feel like we should have more engagement between the prison and also the public regarding what is actually happening in the prison itself for us to moving forward towards a better prison condition.
Do you think there's a role for legal professionals and activists or human rights advocates in educating or making or bridging that gap in knowledge? Is there a role for the wider society to play?
Our role are actually very limited compared to government and MPs and the prison authority. But what we can do is we educate and we raise awareness to the public what's happening in the prison. Are they even very big devil people, or they are actually repenting and turning into new leaf in the prison itself? So I feel like the awareness is the only role that we can play. We have limited role. So I hope and I urge the government to bring in this gap together.
All right, thank you so much, Kayan, for speaking with me. That was lawyer and activist Chong Kayan, and that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.